Why play games? Dear Lily, when you were small, you particularly enjoyed treasure hunts and dressing up. Almost all the time you were playing elaborate games of make-believe with your younger sister. You lived for much of the time in a fantasy world. Watching you, I was reminded that humans have been defined as Homo ludens, that is Latin for playful humans. For while this particular characteristic does not distinguish us from all other species, it is particularly developed in humans. The evidence you can see all around you in the mania for competitive games, gambling and sports. It's also apparent in many parts of our life which we don't normally think of as games or sports. There are games of skill and those of chance, of single combatants against each other, or of teams, involving different artifacts and different rules, balls, cards, dice, etc. Each tends to work in a slightly different way and to appeal to a different part of our psychology. So why do we play? Humans are strongly motivated by curiosity and by a basic playfulness, a desire to compete, fantasize, imagine, struggle. This playfulness is very marked in children but continues throughout our lives. The desire to win, to dominate, to outstrip the opponent, the delight in good performance, the satisfaction in coordinated muscular or social movements, the pleasure in the calculation of risk. All sorts of different elements are involved. A game is a sort of experiment outside time and space. In a game, individuals or teams who start almost exactly equal and play according to the same rules end up with one temporarily conquering the other. It creates differences out of uniformity. It is dynamic and progressive, creating variability out of similarity, artificially creating conflict. It divides and separates people who were previously joined and equal. One person has the top hat in Monopoly, buys up Park Lane and Mayfair, and becomes a rapacious landlord for as long as the game lasts, while another person gets the boot and Old Kent Road. Much of all this is opposed to what happens in many civilizations in India, Africa and China, where people attempt to control and downplay open competition in social life. Rituals, that is orderly, standardized, repetitive behavior, are dedicated to reducing confrontation and variations. Thus, rituals tend to create a temporary phase of equality and closeness in unequal civilizations and societies. They join people and create a temporary unity. We see a games-like process at work in many of the central institutions of a modern society: the stock exchange, the Houses of Parliament, the law courts, as well as on the actual games field. All of these take the form of bounded games, worked out in an arena that allows regulated conflict. This helps change to occur without disrupting the wider society. Within the particular field of the game, during a limited time span, people can behave in odd and often irresponsible ways. They can wear odd clothes, huge helmets, white trousers. They often hit each other, boxing, or tackle each other, rugger, or throw things at each other, cricket. Or they may shout at each other in an aggressive way across the floor of the House of Commons, or be very rude to each other in a court of law, or run around madly gesticulating as in the stock exchange. Yet such behaviour is limited. At the end, people should just shake hands and become friends again, for it is only a game. Who plays? From at least the 16th century, the English became the leading inventors of competitive team games. If we think of the present games of the world, almost all were invented or modified in England. Cricket, football and rugby are the most famous. As well as games, England became a great country for sports: horse riding, dog racing, mountaineering, hunting, fishing and shooting. Likewise, the English were and still are great hobbymongers. George Orwell noted, "We are a nation of flower lovers, but also a nation of stamp collectors, pigeon fanciers, amateur carpenters, coupon snippers, darts players, crossword puzzle fans." Yet the English were only part of a European pattern, for the French, the Italians and the Dutch also form part of a playful civilization. We might assume that this kind of enthusiasm for games is universal. Yet my first impression is that until a few years ago it was limited. I have been told that there were until recently no competitive team games in Japan. There were instead a number of activities that it is very difficult to classify. They are not exactly games, for they seem to have a solemn and ritual component. Hence, they are often described with a term such as a martial art. Even the famous tea ceremony is neither a game nor a hobby, neither an entertainment nor a ritual, but a little of each. These activities lie at an intersection between art, ritual and game in a way that makes them feel strange. They include a number that have the ending do, like kendo or judo, which means the path or the way, similar to the Chinese Dao, and implies a semi-religious aspect, and others such as sumo, wrestling, or pachinko, a kind of bagatelle, which do not feel quite like a game. There were apparently no ball games in which teams fought, as it were, against each other. It is only in the last 100 years or so that the competitive team games of the West have bounced, kicked and batted their way around the world, creating a universal addiction. So everyone is mad about football, and many other people are crazy about cricket. The recentness of the change suggests that games work only under certain political, economic and social conditions. A degree of political and social equality is both a cause and consequence of the development of team games. They can be suppressed as leading to disorder, and they can soon become a form of political activity. The Indians took up cricket with added zest when they realized that they could beat their white masters at it, and also legitimately stand around in a field for hours without being told they were lazy. When games spread, they can also radically change. When the Trobriand Islanders of New Guinea in the Pacific took up cricket, they changed almost all the rules so that each side had dozens of players dressed in war dress and hurled objects at each other. In another part of New Guinea, they have learnt to play football, but they go on playing as many matches as are necessary for both sides to reach the same total of victories. Is science a game? Playfulness often consists of trying out moves, making wild guesses, following intuition and hunches, leaving the logical path, taking risks, not becoming too solemn or wedded to a particular idea or strategy, innovating and experimenting. Successful science often requires a good deal of playful, exaggerated, humorous, outrageous speculation and testing. By definition, the major advances will occur in unexpected areas, and these are often reached by leaps of the mind. The overly serious, logical, thorough, highly disciplined mind often misses the significant, strange clue that gives a new insight. A trained Confucian scholar or Buddhist monk may be less likely to make the breakthrough than an overgrown undergraduate full of games, fun and pranks. Francis Crick's book about the discovery of DNA is significantly called "What Mad Pursuit?" The ideas were so far-fetched and incredible that most people would have dismissed them as a joke. One of the great problems in the pursuit of knowledge in most societies is that it threatens too many vested interests. Probing the mysteries of nature may bring a power, a threat to the rulers. It may undermine previous knowledge, a threat to priests. It will alter status positions, a threat to the elders and higher social groups. When Galileo pointed out that the Earth revolved around the Sun rather than the other way around, he was forced to retract his statements publicly under threat of torture. The boundedness that we find as a central aspect of games, and which we also find essential in law, politics, and the economy, is equally important for science. Very often, those engaged in strange pursuits are hounded out as magicians or sorcerers. But particularly in the less controlled areas of Protestant Europe and America, scientists of past centuries could engage in their particular part hobbies, part games, without fear of angry mobs. They could pursue them in the hope that their skill and ingenuity in this particular game against the greatest opponent, a cunning creator who had concealed the clues in nature, would be recognized for their virtuosity. Why do children particularly play? Playing games is usually strongly encouraged in schools. This is partly because it strengthens the muscles and uses up surplus physical energy. Yet team games are also believed to improve social skills. The essence of a team game is to balance selfishness, the desire to shine and triumph, with sociality, the desire to help one's team win. This balance is also one of the most difficult things to achieve in much of social life. When to keep the ball and when to pass it to another is an art that stretches out into many of our activities. The balance between cooperation and self-assertiveness is well taught within the structured environment of the rules of a game. It is also believed that games enable people to learn how to demarcate their lives. While the game is on, we abide by certain rules. Then the whistle blows, and we no longer have to. Learning how to handle defeat. It took me some years not to weep bitterly after losing a game, and feel relaxed with someone who has outwitted or outplayed us is another important life skill. Likewise, the subtle art of playing within the rules, but using as much scope and skill within them as possible, is one that is handy in almost every branch of life. You have to learn the rules of your trade or occupation, but if you just stick to these without creative thought, then you will end up as nothing special. If you break them and are caught, the result is even worse. How can you keep to the rules and yet excel? Skill, personal tricks, long training, and perceptive observation of others are among those things that are needed. The concept of spin, which makes the ball behave in odd ways in cricket and disguises the real motives of politicians when they deal with the public, is one example of this. What is the fascination of games? People enjoy playing games because they are animals who like to compete and dominate, to play, strive, outwit, win, are all important survival tools. But there is more to games than this, particularly team games. Members of a cricket, football or bowls team play together and often socialize together, and either create or express their friendship in this way. Friendly rivalry over a game of chess or in the squash court may also cement friendships. Matching minds and bodies, or depending and sharing with other members of the team, both give great satisfaction. Friends play together, and the stress on learning games at school is also meant to be a lesson in friendship. Like friendship, play is not directed to a practical goal. It's just a game. But to refuse to play is a rejection. Equally intriguing is why people watch games and sport. The extraordinary growth of spectator sports, undoubtedly deeply influenced by television and by the way in which sport, alongside sex, is the main way of selling goods, is one of the marks of our world. The historian of technology, Lewis Mumford, suggests that modern sports may be defined as those forms of organized play in which the spectator is more important than the player. They are a spectacle, in many ways closer to drama or ritual than to playing a game. The crowd becomes part of a chorus, emotionally and psychologically blending together, taken for a moment out of their ordinary lives and worries. Like spectators at the contests of gladiators and wild animals in Rome, or its modern equivalent, the bullfight, or even the circus, the crowd cheers and boos. Even in the privacy of their home, people dress up in their team's clothes, drink lager, and pretend that they are part of the crowd as they watch the television. Being in a crowd makes us brave. We can shout and say things we would normally be too timid to express. It's often the time when we can make our prejudices and passions known, whether for our country, our political opinions, or our hatreds, in a way that as single individuals we find impossible. It's not surprising that all dictatorships love assembling partisan groups and setting them marching and singing and shouting. Mass sport and private play are forms of conspicuous consumption. Many modern societies have a great deal of leisure, and people fill up their spare time and often demonstrate their newfound affluence through games. Often they do this publicly, but equally often privately, in the world of computer games and internet rivalries. The increasing amount of leisure time, often created by machines, must be filled. Playing in various ways is what humans like to do in their spare time. So if anything is the new religion of the whole world, it is football. More money, emotion, and activity are now generated by sport, games, and hobbies than anything else on earth, except perhaps war. Indeed, war, to some of its proponents, is the sublimest form of game. It adds the spice of the risk of death to the usual thrills of other contests. On the other hand, for many people, it's better to fight in the World Cup than in the trenches.